We were flying home for Thanksgiving when my husband told me he had booked first-class seats, but only for himself and his trusted female colleague. As for me, his wife in name and in-law, I was left to spend 6 long hours in economy. He claimed the company had budget restrictions and asked me to be understanding. I kept quiet, not because I was willing to tolerate it, but because I already held something far more powerful than anger. A few pieces of proof, carefully prepared, were all it would take to make this trip unforgettable for both of them. And just as I expected, when the two of them came stumbling into the house in a panic, my mother-in-law didn't even glance their way. She turned to me instead, calm and sharp, and said, "Tell me, how did you know she had your husband's pajamas in her suitcase?" I met her eyes and smiled. The show had gone on long enough. Before our flight back to Texas for Thanksgiving, David told me he'd booked 2 first-class tickets so we could travel comfortably after a long, exhausting year. I still remember clearly how he said it, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, hand resting gently on my shoulder like everything had been thoughtfully arranged. But just a few days later, while searching for a work file on his computer, I stumbled upon a chat thread between David and Chloe, his ever-so-friendly coworker, in a work messaging app. The words were plain and undeniable. "Don't worry, Chloe. I've taken care of it. I booked us the premium package. She'll be fine back there. She's used to it anyway." I froze. That she he was referring to, was that me? I didn't confront him right away. A part of me wanted to believe I was overthinking it, that maybe it was just 2 colleagues joking around. But everything became clear the moment we reached JFK Airport. As we got to the check-in counter, David turned to me, handed me my boarding pass, and patted me on the shoulder like I was one of his subordinates. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Please understand, the company's cutting back, and there's no way I could justify 3 first-class tickets on the expense report. Luckily, I managed to get one for Chloe. She's a key partner, and I need to maintain a good relationship on this business trip. I'm sure you get it." I gripped the ticket tightly, my chest tightening, and finally asked in a strained voice, "You promised me. And this business trip you're talking about, aren't we supposed to be visiting your parents for Thanksgiving?" Just then, Chloe walked up. She wore a tight white dress that clung to every curve, her hair in soft curls, heels clicking sharply against the airport floor like each step had been choreographed. She glanced at me with a smile so fake it barely held together. "Don't worry about me, Mia," she said sweetly. "David and I will be just fine up front. You're probably used to the back by now, right? At least you won't have to listen to us talk business the whole way. It'd be exhausting." With that, she hooked her arm around David's and pulled him toward the first-class boarding gate like I wasn't even standing there. David still turned back to toss me one last line. "Just stay in your seat when we board. I'll come find you after we land." I stayed exactly where I was, holding the economy ticket in my hand as my heart sank to the cold airport floor beneath me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't demand an explanation like I might have before. For the entire 6-hour flight, curled up in a cramped economy seat, I kept my composure so well that even I was surprised. Outsiders might think I'd grown used to being dismissed, that I was used to Chloe's presence, used to being the one left behind. But no, my silence wasn't resignation, it was clarity. This time, I had something I never had before. Proof. A single message from a work app spoke louder than any apology ever could. The late-night messages between David and Chloe had been going on for months. In the beginning, I still questioned him, still got upset, still wanted a clear answer about what was really going on between the two of them. But David always had a way of making me feel like I was the one overreacting. He'd say, "Don't be paranoid. We're just working on the same project. There's nothing for you to be imagining." Not wanting to stir up conflict, I let it go. Until one night, I happened to see a photo Chloe posted, just a glass of red wine. But reflected in the mirror behind it was a man's silhouette, and he was wearing the exact same watch I had just gifted David for his birthday last month. When I asked about it, he sighed and brushed it off, saying, "It's just a watch. Lots of people have the same one. You're being too petty." Then he turned away, leaving me there to apologize for not trusting my own husband. I kept quiet, but inside me, something had cracked. Everything truly shattered a week before the trip. I was in the kitchen when I overheard David talking on the phone in the living room. His voice was low and serious, but every word came through clearly. "Don't worry, when we're back in Texas, I'll talk to her. We can't keep dragging this out. I'm exhausted." At that moment, I stood frozen, still holding the paring knife without even realizing what I was doing. I didn't need any more answers. That her he was referring to was clearly me. And talking didn't mean fixing things, it meant ending them. That's when it hit me. All the silence I'd held onto for so long only made it easier for someone else to erase me quietly, cleanly, like I never really belonged. That night, I stared at David's phone sitting on the table. He had forgotten it there. I knew the password, and I also knew that if I stayed silent this time, there wouldn't be another chance. The moment he stepped into the shower, I unlocked the screen and installed a call recording app disguised as a harmless note-taking tool. I even enabled ambient audio recording, just in case. Once everything was set, I turned off the screen and placed the phone exactly where it was, like I had never touched it. Strangely, I didn't feel afraid. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally in control, and I made myself a promise this time. I wasn't going to let it slide. The next morning, I sat in the car with David and Chloe. All three of us wore neutral expressions like nothing was out of place. Chloe sat up front, laughing and chatting like she was the rightful wife, while I looked like some assistant tagging along on a business trip between two professionals. But unlike before, I didn't lower my gaze or turn toward the window to avoid their presence. I sat upright, watching their every move, every glance they exchanged. I listened to every word they said, though I knew I didn't need to remember them all. David's phone would do that part for me. I wasn't there to endure. I was there to document. And deep down, I knew this trip would be the last time anyone else got to decide where I sat. On the plane, I sat quietly in my seat near the back, earbuds in, screen off. The recording app I had installed earlier was running silently in the background, and every sound picked up from the phone tucked inside David's breast pocket played clearly in my ears. I closed my eyes like I was sleeping, but my mind had never been more alert. When the flight attendant brought drinks around, I stood up and casually made my way toward the restroom, strolling past the first-class cabin. On the left, I saw David slicing fruit-thin apple slices arranged neatly on a silver tray. His other hand rested lightly on the back of Chloe's seat, just enough to appear intimate to anyone watching, but not so obvious that he couldn't call it a coincidence if questioned. Chloe tilted her head, smiling as she adjusted the silk blanket draped across her lap. I looked at the scene without that familiar pang in my chest. I didn't feel a thing. I turned back, returned to my seat, reconnected my earbuds, turned the volume up just a little more, and kept waiting. Once the plane had leveled off, I walked forward again, this time more slowly. They didn't even notice me. They probably thought I had drifted off somewhere in economy, wrestling with a stiff headrest and the roar of the engines. As I glanced over, I saw them sharing a single blanket. Chloe was leaning her head on David's shoulder, whispering something that made him chuckle. At that exact moment, their voices came through my earbuds. Chloe's tone was syrupy sweet. "David, I'm so grateful you arranged everything. It's so comfortable up here, nothing like those poor souls in the back." David's reply carried a smugness that cut through the cabin. Relax. My old wife back there is probably trying to nap in that cramped seat. Poor thing. But whatever. Let her be. I stopped right there in the aisle. I didn't speak. I didn't let a flicker of expression show. I simply turned back and walked to my seat, keeping my face as calm as possible. They had spelled everything out themselves. I didn't need to imagine anymore. The truth had spoken in their own voices. And more importantly, it was recorded. Clear. Vivid. Undeniable. Earbuds still in place, I leaned my head against the window as if dozing off, but every word streaming from David's phone kept my eyes open and my mind razor sharp. Chloe's voice came through, no longer sweet but edged with contempt. When are you finally going to tell that worn-out wife of yours you're sick of her? Look at her, sloppy and pathetic. Standing next to me? Aren't you ashamed? I wasn't even surprised to hear her say it. I'd grown used to her arrogance. What froze me was what came next. David's voice was calm, almost icy. Relax. Once I transfer the last of our savings into my private account, I'll get rid of her. Don't worry, the first-class seat was only ever for you. Let her stay back there in economy so she remembers her place. I clenched my fists. I thought that was enough, but it wasn't. Chloe's voice came again, sharper this time, like one final slap across the face. I'm getting impatient. My husband's coming back from his overseas trip soon. We need to move fast. I heard David chuckle softly, then say something that drained whatever feeling I had left. Got it. Leave it to me. I pulled out my earbuds and stared at the seat back in front of me, motionless. Everything I needed, I had it now. The evidence, their plan, the truth behind it all, and something I never expected. Chloe had a husband. David wasn't just betraying me. He was involved in wrecking someone else's marriage too. The disgust rose in my throat, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply opened my phone, saved the entire recording, and sent it to a private email account I had set up months ago. Then I uploaded it to a secure cloud drive made specifically for this kind of situation. I wasn't putting everything in one place. I wasn't stupid. The plane began its descent, and the flight attendant announced landing procedures. I fastened my seatbelt and straightened my jacket. The moment the wheels hit the runway, I was the first to unbuckle, the first to rise, and the first to step off the plane long before David and Chloe even had time to gather their belongings. I didn't look back. I called a cab right there at the airport and gave the driver the address to my in-laws' house. I needed them there. I needed his whole family present. Because this time, forgiveness wasn't on the table. I wouldn't let them keep seeing me as the quiet little wife resigned to the back row. If they were expecting a show, I'd give them the finale. And this time, the spotlight wasn't on Chloe. It wasn't on David. It was on me. I stepped into my in-laws' farmhouse, the warm scent of pumpkin pie and roast chicken already filling the kitchen air. My mother-in-law came out from the living room, still holding a ladle in her hand, her eyes widening in surprise. Mia, why are you here alone? Where's David? I slipped off my coat and offered a tired smile. The plane landed, and I wasn't feeling great, so I came ahead a bit early. David had some things to handle with a colleague. He'll probably be here later. My words made her pause for a beat, but before she could ask anything else, Sarah, David's sister, spoke up. A colleague? On Thanksgiving? That doesn't sound quite right. I didn't answer. I just hung up my coat and walked toward the kitchen. Let me help you and Sarah with dinner prep. I think I need to do something to shake off the fog. I chopped onions and stirred the gravy, pretending to be focused on the boiling turkey broth. My mother-in-law kept glancing at the clock, then out the window. I knew she was waiting. Sarah paced in and out of the living room, probably sensing something off as well. But I didn't rush. I hadn't come here to argue. I came to let the truth reveal itself. Footsteps pounded hurriedly down the hallway. Before I could turn around, David's voice echoed from the living room. "Mom, have you seen Mia? I couldn't find her at the airport." The kitchen door swung open just as he finished his sentence. David barged in, followed closely by Chloe and their friend Jennifer. All three of them looked breathless, pale. David froze when he saw me at the stove. Chloe furrowed her brow and was the first to speak. "You're here? Wait, when did you leave?" The moment David saw me, his expression darkened. He pointed straight at me in front of the whole family and snapped, "Mia, are you out of your mind? You disappeared at the airport and had Chloe and me worried sick. Why didn't you just wait?" I hadn't even opened my mouth when Chloe stepped forward. Her voice was all cotton and honey, but her eyes scanned me from head to toe. "Oh my God, Mia, you scared us half to death. You're a grown woman. You can't just act childish and irresponsible like that. Who just wanders off on their own?" Before she could finish, Jennifer jumped in from behind, her tone sharp. "Exactly. Chloe and David were stressed out the whole way here. Did you even stop to think how they felt? What you did was extremely selfish." My father-in-law, seated in the middle of the living room, looked up with a stern face and cut through the noise. "What's going on? Why didn't you wait for David?" I stood still, looking at each one of them in turn, then gave a soft smile, calm as ever. "I'm sorry for worrying everyone. It's just that after sitting in economy for 6 hours, my back and neck were killing me. When the plane landed, I didn't want to block the aisle, so I got off early. I figured David and Chloe, being in first class and probably discussing something very important for work, might take a bit longer. So I headed here first to make sure I could help Mom and Sarah get dinner ready on time." The room fell silent. Not a single word followed, except for the soft clink of a spoon dropping in the kitchen. My mother-in-law raised a hand to cover her mouth. David flinched like he'd just been caught off guard and snapped, "What are you even talking about? Work? I told you, the company paid for it." Chloe, standing beside him, flushed red. She turned to me, voice shrill. "What exactly are you implying? David and I are just co-workers. Don't drag other people down with your blind jealousy." Jennifer wasted no time jumping in, her tone cutting. "I can vouch for them. Chloe and David have always been completely professional. What you're doing now is textbook bitterness. You're clearly resentful over being stuck in economy, and now you're lashing out like some petty child." I didn't argue. I didn't interrupt. I simply glanced at the clock and let a faint smile tug at my lips. Because I knew I hadn't said everything yet. And this little performance they were putting on, this so-called professionalism they were clinging to, was about to be peeled apart, layer by layer, right here in this very room. I stood in the center of the living room, my hand wrapped tightly around my phone. The smile on my lips wasn't one of patience anymore. It was the calm confidence of someone who knew they held all the cards. I looked at David and Chloe and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Jealousy? Slander? Professionalism? Then let's all hear just how professional and honorable the two of you really are. Especially the part where you talk about your so-called worn-out ex-wife and David's plan to move the savings before dumping her. The moment I finished, both David and Chloe shouted in unison, "Don't." "No." I didn't reply. I just tapped the screen and played the recording on speaker. The room fell completely silent, filled only with the sound of David and Chloe's voices ringing out clear and sharp. "That tired old wife of mine? Just leave her. When are you going to tell that pathetic ex-wife you're done with her? Let her sit in economy so she remembers her place. My husband's coming back from overseas soon. We need to move fast." Every word echoed through the house like a slap in their own faces. My father-in-law shot to his feet, face flushed red, slamming his hand on the table. David, you disrespectful brat, how dare you treat your wife like this? My mother-in-law covered her face, tears spilling down as she choked out in disbelief. Dear God, how did my son turn into this? Sarah came over and wrapped her arms around me, her voice trembling. Mia, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. Tom, her husband, glared at David with utter disgust, his voice low and tight. You bastard, you don't deserve to be called a man. Jennifer, the friend who came with Chloe, stood frozen, her face pale as chalk, mouth open but completely speechless. David stepped back, mumbling like a man completely undone, unable to hide the humiliation that had finally caught up to him. Chloe stood motionless, her entire body shaking, tears sliding down her cheeks as she looked at me with something between fear and pleading. I said nothing. I didn't add another word. I let the room sit in the weight of every sentence I had been forced to endure for the length of that flight. Chloe dropped to the floor, burying her face in her hands, tears streaming down as her voice trembled uncontrollably. Please, Uncle, Aunt, you have to believe me. David and I are just close friends. Mia misunderstood everything. She's just jealous and made up that fake recording to frame me. I never said any of those things. David stood beside her, nodding furiously like he was clinging to the last floating piece of wreckage. Yes, please believe me, Mom. Dad. Chloe's innocent. Mia made it all up because she couldn't handle our work relationship. There's nothing between me and Chloe. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked slowly toward the beige suitcase Chloe had rolled into the house when she first arrived. A luxury brand, gleaming logo, nothing subtle about it. I didn't touch it. I simply stood there and spoke in a calm, even tone. Just friends and co-workers, huh? Then I suppose this co-worker's suitcase should be full of company documents. Chloe panicked instantly. She lunged forward, grabbing the suitcase and shouting. What are you doing? That's my personal property. You have no right. This is a violation of my privacy. I looked at her, said nothing. I lifted my foot and tapped the edge of the suitcase, which was sitting slightly askew on the hardwood floor. It tipped. Then it fell. The lock popped open. The lid flew back, and a few items spilled out in front of everyone. I didn't need to say another word. From that moment on, the evidence would speak for itself. The suitcase burst open, sending everything scattering across the floor. The sharp clatter of metal against hardwood cut through the dead silence like a blade. Women's clothes tumbled out in a mess of fabric, and among them was a familiar gray hoodie, the same one David had worn all last week to the gym. I could still catch the faint scent of his cologne on the collar. But what made the room freeze was a small white bottle that rolled out to the edge of the rug. I stepped toward it slowly, leaned down, and read the label. Chlamydia treatment, 7-day course, patient name, Chloe Dawson. The entire room stopped breathing for a second before erupting into gasps, murmurs, the screech of chairs being pushed back. David stood frozen, eyes locked on the bottle. His face turned ghostly pale, lips twitching as if he wanted to say something but couldn't form a sound. He staggered back, hand clutching his throat like he couldn't breathe, then turned to Chloe with a look of absolute disbelief. Chloe lunged forward, reaching desperately for the bottle, but it was too late. Everything was already out in the open. I tilted my head and pointed at the bottle as if I'd just stumbled upon something astonishing. Oh wow, chlamydia medication? Is this yours, Chloe? Then I looked up and turned to David. My voice stayed light, but each word landed like a blade. David, do you see this? Maybe this is the real reason she told you to get tested for that allergy last week. She must have been so worried, afraid the infection might spread to you. And lately, haven't you been saying you feel run down, sore throat and all? Maybe it's because—" I didn't even finish the sentence before David turned sharply toward her, panic in his voice, each word spat out like broken glass. "You're seriously infected? When did you get tested? Why didn't you tell me?" His questions hung in the air like slaps thrown in reverse, confirming everything without needing another word. Chloe whipped her head around and screamed, "You idiot! Shut up! She's baiting you!" But it was too late. Nothing she said could undo what was already unraveling. The truth had come out, and what needed to rot could no longer be hidden. My father-in-law slammed his hand on the table, his voice erupting like thunder, shaking the entire house. "You disgusting bastard! Not only did you cheat, you brought a woman with a goddamn STD into my home on Thanksgiving. Get out!" Just as his words landed, the screech of tires came from the driveway. I turned to the window and saw a woman in a long coat rushing toward the house, her face twisted in confusion. Chloe's mother-in-law, Mrs. Carter. The moment she stepped through the door, her eyes scanned the room until they landed on the open suitcase and the scattered contents. "Chloe, what's going on here? My son called me. He said he saw photos of you and this man on a plane all over social media. He's on his way, and he's furious. He said your suitcase—" She trailed off, her eyes locking onto the gray hoodie and the white bottle still lying on the wooden floor. Her face turned pale, hands clenched instinctively. She bent down, read the label on the bottle, then stood upright, her voice shaking. "Oh my God, that medication? It's real? My son was telling the truth? You didn't just cheat, you brought a disease into our home?" Chloe panicked, lunging forward to grab her arm. "Mom, please, you're misunderstanding. I can explain." But Mrs. Carter yanked her arm back violently and took a wide step away, her expression no longer worried, but revolted. "Don't touch me. I treated you like my own daughter. I trusted you, and this is what you do? You're a terrible person. Our family cannot accept this." She turned and left, her legs unsteady but determined, whispering to herself like trying to stay composed. "I have to call my son. This is horrible." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching the scene unfold like a reckoning long overdue. And the best part was, I didn't have to lift a finger. Not even 10 minutes after Mrs. Carter stormed out, the roar of an engine tore through the tense silence outside. A pickup truck screeched to a halt in the driveway. Before I could even turn around, the front door burst open. Jake, Chloe's husband, charged into the house, face burning red, fists clenched tight, and his voice thundered through the air, thick with tension. "Chloe, you filthy piece of trash!" He didn't wait for explanations. His eyes swept across the room just once before locking on Chloe, who stood crying in the middle of the living room like the end of the world had arrived. Then he turned to David, voice dripping with contempt. "So you're the co-worker?" And then he looked at me and said, "Thank you for posting those photos and notes online. If you hadn't, I would never have seen the real face of this woman. My entire circle has seen it now." I stepped forward slightly and gave a small shake of my head, my voice calm and steady. "I didn't post anything. Maybe someone on the flight saw what happened and took the photo?" Jake turned to Chloe, his mouth twitching with rage. "What else do you have to say now? You told me it was a business trip with a female friend. Meanwhile, your suitcase is full of strange men's clothes and medication. Were you trying to kill me?" Then he turned back to David, let out a dry, bitter laugh. "You two are perfect for each other. Congratulations on your little gift from this woman." Without giving anyone a chance to react, he looked at Chloe again, voice firm and final. "I'm throwing out all your things. Don't ever come back." Jake pulled his keys from his pocket and walked out, leaving Chloe crumpled on the floor, her hands covering her face, her entire body shaking under the weight of humiliation she couldn't escape. My father-in-law stood slowly, and his expression was no longer furious. It was something deeper. Utter disappointment. "Get out, all of you. This house has no room for liars and filth." David stood motionless, staring blankly at nothing. The man who once held his head high, now reduced to a twisted shadow of himself, standing in the ruins he built with his own hands. That night, the entire house felt drained of life. No one touched the untouched turkey still sitting on the table. The sound of silverware clinking against plates might as well have disappeared. David quietly went upstairs and locked himself behind a closed door. Chloe and her best friend Jennifer had already been thrown out and were probably dragging themselves into some cheap, freezing motel room on the edge of town. I sat on the sofa in silence until late into the night, not saying a word. The next morning, I went out to the garden to pick some mint and saw my father-in-law leaning on the railing, his hands fumbling like he had wanted to say something for a long time. He looked at me, his voice heavy. "I'm sorry, Mia. And especially I, failed to see who David really was. This family owes you a big apology." I looked up at him, my voice quiet but clear. "I don't blame you. Everything's out in the open now. I just can't stay with a man who's lied to me and treated me with such contempt." As soon as I finished speaking, my mother-in-law rushed out from the house and wrapped her arms around me, her voice choked with emotion. "Please stay with us. No matter what, you're still a daughter-in-law of this family. Let us at least try to make up for a small part of what you've been through." I didn't say anything more. I simply gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a quiet thank you. But my decision remained unchanged. By noon, while I was making coffee in the kitchen, David appeared. His eyes were hollow, his face more worn than I had ever seen it. He stood there for a moment before finally speaking, his voice slightly trembling. "I'm really sorry. I was blind. What happened with Chloe, it was temporary. She tempted me. But I still love you." I set the cup down and turned to face him. My gaze held no anger now, only the calm clarity of someone who had reached the end. "A mistake?" "No, David, that wasn't a mistake. That was a series of choices. You chose to buy her a first-class ticket. You chose to let your wife sit in the back. You chose to quietly move our savings. And you chose to break our vows. 6 hours on a plane were more than enough for me to see the kind of future I'd be walking into if I stayed with you." David stepped closer, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "But don't you think about us? About all the memories we shared?" I shook my head and cut him off. "Beautiful memories are still memories. But the present was shattered by your own hands. Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It was the way you belittled me. That sentence you said to her, that I was used to sitting in the back. It'll stay with me for the rest of my life. And that, more than anything, is why I'll never come back. I didn't need anyone to convince me anymore. I declined my in-laws' offer to stay. I need a fresh start. Staying here would only keep me trapped in painful memories." Before I left for the airport, Sarah handed me a business card, her voice firm. "This is the number of a really good divorce lawyer I know. She'll help you. Please keep in touch." I boarded the flight back to New York, not to return to the old house, but to begin again. Through the window, I watched the small Texas town shrink beneath the clouds. The woman who once sat quietly in economy, small and silenced, was no longer there. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to expose anything further, because I knew leaving was the most beautiful answer I could give, and the most powerful one. 2 weeks after that fateful Thanksgiving night, I was back in New York, temporarily staying at a close friend's place and beginning to submit job applications again. As for David, he was still living in the apartment we once shared, now a shell of himself, haunting the space like a ghost. He had lost his job and was being frozen out by everyone at the company, the scandal spreading like wildfire. Everyone had heard the story about the boss who cheated with his mistress, only to be publicly exposed by both families over dinner. But what terrified David the most wasn't the shame. It was the lingering fear of whether he had contracted anything from Chloe. As for Chloe, she was now a woman backed into a corner. After being thrown out by Jake and served divorce papers, she had moved into a rundown rental apartment in a gloomy suburb. Jobless, shunned, her name now avoided like poison, the title of diseased mistress clung to her like a permanent scarlet letter. One afternoon, my friend told me that Chloe had called David in a state of hysteria, her voice screeching through the phone like it could rip the speaker apart. "David, you can't just abandon me like this. I've lost everything. My home, my husband, my job. I need money. You owe me." But what she got in return was David's voice, cold as stone, stripped of any trace of emotion. "Get lost, you crazy bitch. You still dare call me? I'm getting tested because of you. Don't ever contact me again." And with that, he hung up without a second's hesitation. But Chloe wasn't done. When you have nothing left, you become dangerously reckless. She started sending David a series of threatening messages, accompanied by intimate photos of the two of them from their affair. One message stood out short, but terrifying. $50,000, or I post everything. I'll send it to your business partners, your ex-wife. Let's see who goes down first. David turned pale, panicked, and rushed to tell his parents everything. The entire Johnson family held an emergency meeting in the living room, and for the first time in his life, David actually listened to someone else's advice. They told him he needed to see a lawyer. When he finally did, the attorney only had to read the message once before shaking his head. "This is blackmail. What she's doing is a crime. This is your chance to cut ties with her legally, cleanly." And for the first time in the long string of poor decisions he'd made, David finally did something right. But the damage was already far beyond repair. I still remember that morning vividly. David called me only to say he was following the advice of his lawyer and the police. They had laid out a plan, and this time, David had no other option but to comply. He showed up at the small cafe on the corner, where Chloe had already set the meeting. His face was tense, his hand gripping a fake envelope. Chloe walked in with dark circles under her eyes, her whole appearance worn down, but the smile on her lips radiated triumph. She dropped into the seat across from him and hissed through her teeth. "So, you're finally scared. Give me the money." David shakily slid the envelope across the table, his voice cracking. "Here's your money. Delete the photos." Chloe immediately reached for it, but the moment her fingers touched the paper, two plainclothes officers stepped out from behind. One of them grabbed her wrist and spoke clearly. "Chloe Dawson, you're under arrest for extortion and criminal threats. You have the right to remain silent." The entire cafe went still, all eyes snapping toward their table. Chloe panicked, thrashing, screaming. "You set me up, you bastard! I'll kill you!" Her voice shrieked through the air, but it was quickly silenced by the cold click of metal handcuffs. Several customers had already pulled out their phones, capturing the whole scene as Chloe's face twisted in shock and humiliation, exposed for everyone to see. Within hours, the video had spread across social media, especially among the Vietnamese community in the US, where everyone was buzzing about it. Chloe, once known as David's charming business partner, now carried a different title: the blackmailing mistress. She hadn't just lost her family and her reputation. She now bore a stain that could never be erased, a criminal caught on camera, exposed in front of the world. When the court delivered its verdict, it was over for good. Chloe was sentenced to prison for extortion, closing the final chapter of her lies and greed. And I knew that was the only ending she ever deserved. 2 years later, I heard that David was still trapped in the spiral of his own downfall. The man who once flaunted his success, impeccably dressed and holding his head high, had become nothing more than a faded shadow in a dim little office. He sat across from clients in a worn-out suit, dark circles under his eyes, his voice trembling as he tried to win small contracts. But no one saw the confident David they once knew. His career lay in ruins, big companies unanimously rejecting him, the label of the cheating boss with a disease clinging to him like a permanent stain. His income was unstable, his life stretched into a string of hard, narrow days. His body might not have been destroyed by the illness, but his mind was completely broken. Every night, he sank into anxiety, living with a shapeless fear. His parents, the Johnsons, still cared for their son, but could no longer hide their disappointment. Their relationship had dwindled to polite formality. They gave all their warmth to me instead, the one they had once owed an apology. On New Year's Eve, David sat alone in the old apartment, scrolling through old photos of us on his phone, whispering words of regret under his breath. But it was far too late. He was now nothing but a wandering ghost of a once glittering past he had destroyed with his own hands. The cafe was unusually quiet this morning. I sat across from David, the divorce papers laid out between us. He looked at me for a long time before finally speaking in a broken voice. "You look radiant. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, one more time." I gave a faint smile, not bitter anymore, just a quiet release. "You don't need to apologize anymore, David. Things are different now. In fact, I should thank you." David looked up, startled. "Thank me?" I nodded slightly, my voice steady. "Thank you for that fateful flight. If it weren't for your cruelty, I might still be the woman who kept shrinking herself, living inside a lie. That flight woke me up. It taught me I deserve respect. I deserve to be loved." I signed the paper, the sound of the pen sliding across the page echoing like the period at the end of an old chapter. When I looked up, David was sitting silently, head bowed, shoulders trembling slightly. But me, I felt nothing but peace. One evening, I stood in the middle of a sleek art gallery in New York, warm lights casting a soft glow over the paintings and graphic designs that were entirely my own. Dressed in a simple black dress, I held the microphone and smiled, my voice steady and confident. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This is my very first collection, and I poured my entire heart into creating it. I never imagined I'd be standing here, but maybe the cracks in our past really are where the light gets in." The guests listened closely, a few nodding with quiet admiration, and I realized that I was no longer the wife left behind. I had become a woman who stood on her own, strong and respected. This success was made possible in part by Sarah, who once handed me that lawyer's business card, but it was also built from the sleepless nights I spent working, quietly rebuilding everything from the ground up. At one of my exhibitions, I met James, a calm and thoughtful architect. He walked up, studied one of the pieces, then turned to me with a gentle smile. "I'm genuinely impressed. The way you use color to tell a story is so unique." I smiled back. "Thank you. That story is part of my life." James wasn't someone who came to replace anyone. He was someone who saw and valued the parts of me I had once buried deep. We talked more, shared our work, and gradually built something steady. A relationship built on balance and care, where I never had to shrink myself or hide the old scars. Time moved quickly, and by the Lunar New Year, James and I returned to visit the Johnsons. The old farmhouse that had once echoed with arguments now warmed with laughter, the scent of baked goods, and kind holiday wishes. Mrs. Johnson hugged me tightly, and James blended in so naturally it felt like he had belonged there all along. Meanwhile, I knew David was still out there, battling his own loneliness and regret. But for me, everything had changed. There are cracks in life that seem like they'll pull us under, but it's through those very cracks that the light comes in. I didn't try to glue the past back together. I learned to walk across the broken pieces and keep moving forward. Happiness isn't a destination. It's the courage to continue after every fall. And somehow, I found it. On the road back, I held James's hand and felt a strange, quiet peace. I no longer needed to strike back, because my life today, full of purpose and love, is already the loudest, clearest answer to all the pain that came before. What moved me most was that David's parents still treated me like their own daughter. Mrs. Johnson would call often, her voice warm through the line. "Mia, are you doing well? I sent you some treats from back home. Make sure you get them." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes, not from pain, but from quiet relief. I knew I had made it through the dark and found my own radiant sunrise. I was no longer the woman who stayed silent in the background. I was me, whole, strong, and free. Sometime later, I unexpectedly received a letter from David asking to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town. I hesitated, but in the end, I went. He was already there, looking thinner than I remembered, his face marked by the weight of years steeped in regret. When he saw me walk in, he offered a faint smile, his voice low. "Mia, I have no right to hold on or expect anything from you. I just wanted to wish you well. You've found happiness, and I truly believe James will take better care of you than anyone ever could." I stayed silent, letting his words wash over me like a quiet release. He told me he no longer believed in love, that everything that had happened led him to one decision: to leave behind the noise of the world and devote himself to a monastic life. He said it was the only path that could bring him peace again. Before getting up, David slid a folder across the table. "This is everything I have left. I want you to have it. Call it closure. Call it peace of mind." I opened it and saw deeds, bank statements, a sum that wasn't small. Everything told me he was truly letting go. I looked up and saw eyes that were still sad, but no longer torn. In that moment, I understood the past had truly closed its door, and I had already stepped into a new journey, one filled with more peace and light than I ever thought possible. This story isn't just a painful journey of exposing a betrayer. It is proof that true strength begins the moment we choose to stand up for ourselves. No one deserves to live under deception or be treated with disregard. The day we learn to let go, to reclaim our worth, is the day we unlock a new door to happiness. If you've ever found yourself in a similar place, remember that you're not alone. Truth and justice may take their time, but they will never fail to arrive. What matters most is having the courage to keep walking. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments, hit like to support the creator, and subscribe to Revenge Diary so you won't miss the next story. Because some lessons are written in scars. But from those very scars, we find the strength to rise and move forward.